This video will offer a run-through on how to complete NTRs in an automated fashion using just the QuickBooks Online ecosystem. Now, I'm going to start in an empty QBO file, and if I think about what I really need to get this file set up and ready to accept transactions, I really need two things. I need a chart of accounts, and I need balances on those accounts either from last year's NTR date or from the last reconciliation date. And so in my case, I have that data on Caseware, and I've just exported it into a simple CSV format. And I need to do a little bit to this to get it into a format that QuickBooks can read it. And so at first, I just need to get rid of some of that non-critical information, such as some of the header level information, any blank rows that you see, as well as any information at the bottom, such as version or note history, or any summations. Once I get it into a format that looks something like this, where we have our column headers, and directly below that are all our various accounts, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to move it over into our converter tool. Now what this converter tool is an Excel macro-enabled workbook that we've built to facilitate taking a trial balance from Caseware and transforming it into a format that QuickBooks can natively read, all without the need to do any extra edits to it. And so I'm going to paste it in here, and I need to take note of two pieces of information. The first is the amount of digits in our account numbers. Universally today, it looks like we're dealing with 5 digits. And the second piece is the date of the trial balance. Now, there was some information on the prior spreadsheet that said December 31st, 2017. I'm going to take those two pieces of information and move them into the second tab here and input them where it asks. So 5 digits for the account numbers and 12/31/2017 for the date of the trial balance. When I move over into the third tab in the workbook, a couple of operations have happened. The first is the account numbers have been taken away, they've been stripped away from the account descriptors and put into their own respective columns. As well, a type and a detail type has been allocated based on standard accounting conventions. We're going to assume that if your account numbers start with a 1, it's probably an asset. If your account numbers start with a 2, it's probably a liability. Now this isn't a hard and fast rule, and it's definitely not rigid. And so what we've done is enabled a legend here that will allow you to overwrite these at this stage before you import into QuickBooks. So you could say that if you want to change something from, say, a current asset and another current asset to a bank checking account, you would simply need to type in BC, the corresponding variable placeholder, into the respective cell in column D. Now I could get very granular here. I could go down the entire list and I could make sure all my payroll liabilities are labeled as such. All my expenses have been partitioned out into various buckets, but for the purpose of the demo, I'm really concerned with making sure that my reconcilable accounts are labeled as such. And so I'm just going to go through and I'm going to find first my asset-based reconcilable accounts. Looks like I have an RBC bank checking as well as a TD account. And in the respective cell, I'm going to type in BC, denoting bank checking. The corresponding change happens in columns F and G. I'm going to do a similar thing for TD account. And then I'm going to go down to my liability-based reconcilable accounts. And it looks like today there's just one. It's a BMO MasterCard. Instead of BC, I'm going to label this as CC, denoting credit card. Now again, I could get granular here, but if you're happy with how this is, you can go ahead and click this button at the top. And this is going to generate two new tabs for us. The first is the Trial Balance Import tab. This is going to be used to import a starting balances journal entry. And the other tab is a Chart of Accounts Import tab, which we're going to use to import a chart of accounts. Now from here, I'm going to go back into QuickBooks, and I'm first going to go into my Chart of Accounts. I'm going to choose to import an Excel-based Chart of Accounts template, the one that we just created with the converter tool. All the mapping is done for you. And on the next screen, I'm going to say yes to all 97 of my accounts. QuickBooks is going to run a quick validation exercise, just confirming that everything is there and there are no duplicates that are already housed in your current chart of accounts. So we now have 97 accounts successfully imported. So we have stage 1 of the setup complete. Now we're just missing the balances, of course. Traditionally, I could go into my toolbox and I could create a journal entry, but we're almost dealing with 100 accounts here. It's almost 100 lines. That's a lot of tabbing and that's a lot of manual data entry. And so to get over this and to automate it into a certain fashion, we're going to look at the app ecosystem. One that we really like is SASANT. SASANT offers you an ability to basically extend the functionality that QuickBooks offers in terms of Excel importing. Now, prior to this, I've just initiated a virtual handshake between SASANT and my specific QBO file, and I've allowed the data transmission to occur between the two systems. And so now I'm just going to browse for that file that we just created in the Converter tool. This time, however, I'm going to choose the TB tab instead of the Chart of Accounts tab. I'm going to choose to bring in a journal entry and a very small mapping procedure, just mapping the column headers to the various fields found in QuickBooks. So account number to account name, journal number to journal number, etc. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to click Import to QuickBooks. And since we're importing a journal entry, SASANT needs to undertake a bit of a validation exercise. If even there's one cent wrong in the balance mismatch between debits and credits, it's going to throw you an error and it's going to tell you where it found one. In this case, we have success. So if I go back into QuickBooks and I give a quick refresh on the page, we'll see that our balances are now non-zero. And these are the balances that came directly from my Caseware trial balance. So I've set up this file now. It's in a state where it's ready to accept transactions. At this point, I need to move over to the transactional side. Now, there are a couple different ways I can get the transactions in here. We always recommend using bank feeds, but if that isn't available, and let's assume that this is an annual client that just drops off statements on a yearly basis, either in a paper format or in a digital format, we need to upload these transactions manually. Today, what I'm going to work with is a statement that looks something like this. So, fairly typical statement. It has our traditional dates, our descriptors, as well as our amounts. Now, of course, this is in a PDF format, so we can't just upload this as is. We need to somehow extract the data and put it into a raw data format so that then we can import into QuickBooks. Now, again, we're going to look to the app ecosystem here to help facilitate taking that information, that critical information, out of this document. One app that we like for this particular process is MoneyThumb. Think of MoneyThumb as a raw data extraction utility. So I'm going to choose to convert that statement that you see in the background. I'm just going to convert to CSV. And in a number of seconds, what it's done is it's taken that format that you see in the background and put it into a format that looks something like this. Now this, of course, is a little more familiar to us. This is now in a raw data format, which will allow us to import this into QuickBooks and bring all the transactions in. So I'm going to go back into QuickBooks now, and I'm going to choose the Upload Transactions. I'm going to browse for that file that we just worked off of. I'm going to say that this relates to the BMO credit card, mapping all the various column headers to the respective fields found within QuickBooks. And I'm going to say yes to all of my transactions. So now we have about 85 or so transactions in this staging area. Now, just to showcase this process a little bit better, I'm also going to upload a bank statement, just so we have a little more real estate to play with. So this time I'm going to choose a bank reconciliation to upload, or rather a bank statement. I'm going to say that this relates to the TD bank account. Again, a very small mapping procedure. This time I just need to tell it where the debits and credits go based on this bank's particular syntax. And once again, saying yes to all of my transactions. So now I have about 180 or so odd transactions in my bank feed area waiting for some logic to be applied to them. Now, traditionally, of course, I could go down the line and I could say that Billy's, maybe this relates to meals, and then add the corresponding transaction into the books. But we don't want to apply our logic line by line. We want to apply our logic in batch. And already we can see a number of similarities forming between our transaction base. We see Billy K's 3 times. We see Canada's CCB a number of times. And I could go down this list and you would see a number of examples where these commonalities form. So with that, instead of applying it line by line, I'm going to create an automation in the form of a bank rule to automate some of the recognition. I'm going to go into my rules mainframe, and I'm going to make a new rule. Now, bank rules are just conditional logic statements. They say if something happens, then do something else. And in this case, we're going to start with something easy, like a restaurant. I'm going to say that if a transaction comes in and it contains McDonald's, or Wendy's, or maybe burger, or pizza, or even Billy's, because we saw that on our transactional list there, I want it to apply meals and entertainment. Now additionally, we don't need to stop there. What we can do is we'll save this rule for now. I can also allocate tax at the bank rule level. So I'm going to go into my taxes module. I'm just going to very quickly set up, let's say BC today. So I'm going to set up the CRA as well as the BC Ministry of Finance. And so now I have my sales tax code set up. And if I go back to my banking interface, I'm going to edit that rule to also encapsulate a tax allocation. So I'm going to say this is applied with GST on it. Now if we go back to the bank feed area, what we should see now is that where we had 0 recognized transactions prior, we now have 3 in the TD account. And similarly, in the BMO credit card, we now have 4 recognized transactions. Where the conditions were met, the logic was applied. Burger in Burger King, that met the condition of one of our bank rules, and it applied 64300, meals and entertainment. Now this is a good start, but collectively, we've only automated 7 out of 180 or so odd transactions. So we're automating to the tune of a couple percent here. What we really want to strive to get to is 70, 80, 90% levels of automation, and we can get there. Using this same methodology and knowing that across your entire client base, regardless of industry, regardless of size, you will see these commonalities form, why not harness the power of a master set of rules that encompasses a lot of these situations that you commonly see? We talked about restaurants. How about expanding that to gas stations? From a categorization perspective, those generally get recognized the same way, client to client. How about office supplies, business insurance, rent? A lot of these things are very common across your entire client base. And so what we can actually do is scale these bank rules and have them be reproducible across all your files. So I'm going to go back into my bank rule interface, and instead of creating these rules one by one, I've gone into a prior QBO file, and I've created about 8 or so rules that I'm very happy with. They haven't misfired, and they're categorizing a lot of the transactions that I'm commonly seeing. I'm going to export that rule set in the form of an Excel file, and import that rule set into this specific file. So I'm going to choose to import rules. And I just have some very common ones today: dollar stores, Canadian Tire, Timmy's, TD Insurance. And in essence, on this screen, I'm bringing my rule set in line with my specific file here, including my specific chart of accounts and my specific list of tax codes. Whereas in the previous file, all of the rules would have landed in a categorization to one of these 4 accounts, I now need to tell the system how does that correspond to this file. Well, it's 60,000 advertising and promotion. It's 64,300 meals and entertainment, and so on. I would go down the list, just ensuring that everything is properly accounted for. And as well, this is tax agency independent. If I've created rules or a set of rules that are from, say, a client that is collecting and remitting out of Ontario, I can actually transmit that to this file and say that that most closely resembles GST PST BC. Once I'm happy with that, I can click import. And now I have 9 rules, and if we go back to the bank feed area, we now see that I have 69 recognized transactions in the BMO card. And similarly, on the TD account, I have 71 recognized transactions. So this is really what we're aiming for, 70–80% levels of automation. And what this is doing is giving you a fundamental shift at how you look at this body of work. Gone are the days of manual data entry. We now move towards higher value exercises. Data validation, data verification. We ultimately need to ensure that our logic is sound, and not just take it for granted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to repurpose my time and use that to do a review stage. So I'm going to go to my recognized transactions, and I'm going to go down the list, just ensuring that everything is reasonable from a categorization perspective. Make sure that there's no tax affecting errors. Bulk barn goes to advertising and promotion. Yeah, that makes sense. Burger King to meals entertainment, that also makes sense. Canadian Tire gas bar to vehicle expense, and Canadian Tire store to vehicle expense. Maybe in this particular client, I actually need to break up fuel and break it out into its own expense account. And so in my exercise and validation, I've caught a rule that is far too overarching and far too general. I'm going to click into that transaction and see that it applied the Canadian Tire rule. And already I can see that this is far too general. It's going to pick up every transaction that has CDN in the transaction descriptor. I need to make this a little more specific. So I'm going to say, you should only trigger off of Canadian Tire store. And now I see that my recognized transactions has dropped down by 1. And if I go to all of my transactions, we can see that the gas bar is no longer being incorrectly categorized. So this is a dynamic interface. Whatever changes you make at this stage will be reflected here before they become balance impacting transactions. So I'm going to click into this gas bar. If I think that it's a transaction that I'm going to commonly see in the future, let's go ahead and automate that at this point. I can very easily create a rule from this transaction. And while I'm here, let's get some economies of scale. And let's add a few more criteria in here so that I capture a few more gas stations. Maybe my Chevron, maybe my Petro-Canadas, and maybe even my Essos. Well, where do we want this to go? We want this to go to fuel expense. It doesn't look like I have an account for that, but that's okay because I can very easily create one. I can say that this is fuel expense, and the number is 65123, let's say. This is just going to be taxed at GST, PST, BC. And I'm going to save. And so now once again, if I go to my recognized transactions, we can see that gas bar is now correctly going to fuel expense, and Canadian Tire store is correctly going to vehicle expense. Now I want to continue my exercise and validation, just going down the list, ensuring that everything is accurate and reasonable. These make sense. Loblaws goes to meals, that also makes sense. McDonald's, Pioneer Station, TD Insurance, Timmy's, and Winners. This all makes sense. Once I'm happy and I've done my validation exercise, I can choose all my transactions and I can batch accept them into the books. At this point, I'm making them balance impacting. I can open a trial balance report and these would be affecting it. Now I want to do a similar operation for the remainder of my reconcilable accounts. So I need to go to my TD account, I need to do my exercise and validation, go down the line, just make sure that everything seems reasonable. In this case it does, and I'm going to once again batch accept them into the books. Now what you'll find is you're left with a very small subset of what you initially started with. You're never going to be able to automate 100%, but you strive for getting very high levels. And what you find is left is usually made up of one of three things. It could be income related, like what we see here. We see a deposit. Because revenue recognition varies so much client to client, that might not be something that you want to automate or rather include in your master set of rules, but that definitely warrants a client-specific rule. So I would go in, very similar to how we did it for the Canadian Tire transaction. I would just click Create Rule from this transaction or use the rule interface and automate that. The second thing that you might see are very industry-specific or vendor, or rather niche-specific vendors. So in this case, this might be a restaurant client and they're getting flour from a particular vendor that you haven't seen prior. That might not be something that is encapsulated in your master set of rules, but again, that definitely warrants a client-specific rule. And the last thing you might see are checks. Checks notoriously come in with very little detail. There's not much that we can do from the onset is to categorize these in an automated way. However, if you have the bank statement available, which you likely do if you're using this process, you can actually, if there are check images available, we can actually retrace a few steps and go back into MoneyThumb. Now MoneyThumb again was the tool that we used to extract the raw data from the bank statement. Another handy thing you can do is actually use a preview window. So if I choose that statement again, I can choose preview, and this is going to give me an open text window that will allow me to make any necessary edits that I see fit before exporting to a CSV file for eventual import into QuickBooks. And so if my transaction here, for instance, said check 303, well, I have my bank statement handy on my second monitor, and I can see that this relates to Home Depot. I could very easily just type in Home Depot, and then when I save this as a CSV and I import it later, I now have a rule that triggers off of Home Depot, and I've automated my checks as well. And so I would continue that process, just going through, making my client-specific rules, and ensuring that everything is appropriately categorized. And at that point, you're effectively done with this stage of the process. You now have a decision to make. Would you like to continue in the QBO ecosystem? Or if you'd like, you can now export a trial balance back into your working paper solution of choice. If you wanted to continue using Caseware, you could just use this, or the QBO import utility that is offered as a direct integration within the Caseware interface. If, however, you wanted to continue on this path and keep everything in one ecosystem, we're going to quickly run through just what that looks like in terms of work papers and tax filing. Now from here, this workflow really shines with simpler compliance level engagements. To access work papers, we can either go back to the accountant level, or alternatively, we can go into our toolbox and click on work papers. Now work papers is broken up into a few different modules, and to start, we'll talk about the document manager. This is the same basic functionality you've come to expect with other working paper solutions, and this allows you the ability to create folder hierarchy to organize all client-related documents I need for this given engagement. And so I've just created a couple here, financial statements with some summarized reports as well as some detailed reports. I also have a folder for my previous returns. To start, I'll create a new folder for some of my planning documents. And in it, I'll place a number of different files. I want to place some notes from my meeting with the client, just some knowledge of the client, an engagement letter, as well as an initial checklist that I'd like to make sure gets done. I'm just going to drag and drop from a file explorer directly into that folder. And now I have all of these documents available for not only myself, but for my other staff to view and download if they need to. Now additionally with Document Manager, you also get folders created for every account that is housed in your client's chart of accounts. So if you need to, you can also attach documents at this level, or even at a higher level of hierarchy, whether it's one tier up at cash and cash equivalent, or even at the current asset level, for instance. Now should you need to, you have the ability to download all of these documents either individually by clicking on the respective folder and then clicking download, or alternatively at the very top here, there's a year-end action button that will allow you to download to zip, and this will include all of the documents that you house here. After you're happy with this, you can go into the next stage, which is the review and adjust stage. Now in here, I can see a very high-level overview of all my accounts in my respective file. And additionally, I can do a few operations here. I may look at this and realize that I need to make an adjusting entry. You can do so by just clicking on the respective account and choosing Make Adjustment. Now perhaps you also want to add some additional detail here in the form of either an attachment or a note. This interface will allow you to do both. So if I go down to say my, let's say payroll liabilities, we'll expand that. And it turns out that there's a certain review stage that needs to be carried out a little bit further on some of these accounts. So I might find the account in question, and on the right-hand side, I have the ability to add notes, attachments, as well as the adjustments, which were mentioned earlier. I'm just going to click Add Note. I'm going to add my initials and say Flagged for further review. Now when I do that, a little icon is going to appear giving me a bit of a visual indicator and drawing my eyes to this if I'm somebody reviewing this file. Now once I'm happy with the final balances and I've made the necessary notes, I've added the attachments that I see fit here, I can click Review, and in essence this is going to give me a bit of a timestamp. This is going to say who reviewed it and most importantly when. Now once I'm happy with this stage, I can go over into the third workflow stage. This one is called grouping and statements, but you can think of this very closely to like a lead sheet or a lead schedule. This allows you once again to introduce structure and hierarchy into your financial reporting. So I've created one just to start. I called it cash, and I've put my 3 asset-based reconcilable accounts into it. I could go even further, and I can even do subfolders of hierarchy if I'd like to. So once again, I'll use the example of payroll liabilities. We'll scroll down and we'll see them here. We can see that the note that I created in the prior screen is here. And I'll choose to create a new group, call these payroll liabilities. And this uses the same drag and drop functionality that you saw in the prior interfaces. I can choose an account and simply drag and drop it into the respective grouping. This now allows me the ability to view final balances of a given group at an aggregate level. Now I could continue doing this, but I'll be happy with this for now. And I'll move over to the final workflow stage, which is tax mapping. Now at this stage, a couple of things are going to happen. I obviously need to review and finalize the tax mapping for all of my accounts. However, some of that is actually done for me already. Based on the types and detail types that you had present in your accounts, there's a built-in level of intelligence that is going to say that something that is mapped as, say, a bank checking account might be related to tax line 1002, and so on. And so it'll do a little bit of this for you, but of course you have the ability to override should you see fit. To do that, I would just need to go on the right-hand side and choose this pencil icon. And I now have the ability to map it to any other tax line based on the standard conventions. Once again, when you're happy with this, you are actually done with the work papers portion. And once again, you have a decision to make. I can either download all of my work to a zip file. In all likelihood, I'd probably want to do that for an audit log. So you could just go up to year-end actions, click download to zip. And the decision really comes through in terms of your options for the filing. Again, QBO is agnostic in its approach and allows you to take the work you've done here in the form of a Jiffy file and export that to your filing system of choice. Now, if you wanted to continue keeping it in one ecosystem, you can launch ProTax T2, which we'll do right now. Now it'll launch an interface that looks something like this, the ability to create a new return. If you already created the return, another thing that you can do is just go to the ProTax module on the left here, and it'll load all the returns that are currently in draft phase. Now ProTax T2 is effectively an emulated version of Intuit Profile, the desktop filing software. So if you've used that in the past, you'll feel right at home. Let's go into the 2019 file. Click View. Now this interface works on a simple form and field view. Directly on the left is going to be your field view. That's where you would actually go in through the various forms and enter all the data that needs to appear on the form. So I could go down to my T2, for instance. And I have all the fields that would appear on the form side. So let's do something simple just to highlight this. I'll go into my summary information, look at general information, and I'll change the legal name of the corporation. Now once I've input the data on the field view, if I go and click this button right here, it'll actually show the corresponding form view. So I can see that the legal name, which I just changed, now appears at the actual form level. So this works on a system of entering your information in the field view first to see what it actually looks like, and then you click on the form view to actually check your work. Now there's also a built-in auditor that displays issues and warnings that require further review. So I can just quickly filter down if I need to, just look at say only warnings, and if I feel that I've actually checked that off, I can simply press that, and it will no longer be a warning when I load back into the file. Now once you're happy with everything you've gone through, you've filled out all the forms that you need to, you can e-file directly from this interface. So at the top, you have all the normal e-filing options that are likely available. And that's the workflow in a nutshell. So I hope this demo provided you an additional lens into what an NTR can look like, all within QBO. Should you have any questions, please reach out to your account manager. Thank you.